every single Saturday in this city, and every single Saturday in every city in this country, and every single Saturday in countries all over the world, single people get all dressed up. The bride puts on a white dress or an almost white dress, and she looks as beautiful as she's ever looked. And the man looks way more handsome than he actually is, and he puts on a tux. And they have spent thousands of dollars and weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months and months preparing for this day. And they come together and they stand at an altar in this thing we call a wedding, and they hold hands, they exchange rings. And then somebody like me or a pastor says, repeat after me, and they take vows. And every single Saturday in this city and in cities all over the country, single people make promises that they can't keep. Now, they mean well, they're not lying. Most of the time, they're not like overtly lying. It's just that they make promises they are not prepared to keep. And they mean well. And then after they're married, a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 3 or 4 months or 6 months, they realize, you know what, I know this is what I said, but this is hard. And all of a sudden they begin to realize, I really did mean it. I meant it when I said it. And then they start holding each other accountable, like, but you said and you promised. And the next thing you know, it's commitment wars, but you committed. And the reason is, and single people, I'm telling you, the married people around you, they didn't discover this till after they were married, so I'm giving you a big heads up. People get married and make promises they can't keep and make vows they can't fulfill. And they want to, and they try, but they just aren't prepared to do it. And the reason they're not prepared is that they overlooked a principle that all of us understand in every other realm of life, but when it comes to relationships, we don't think this is true. And here's the principle. Promises are no substitute for preparation. Promises are no substitute for preparation. If you've ever entered a long-distance race or you're a long-distance runner, you know all about this. It's one thing to sign up for the race. It's another thing to prepare for it. And if you're not prepared, it's a waste of time to promise that you'll finish. Because what determines whether or not you finish a long-distance race is not the promise. It's not even your signature. It's whether or not you've prepared. This is true in every realm of life. You know, a kid can promise the parent what they're going to make on the SAT, but what you make on the SAT has very little to do with what you promise. It has everything to do with how much you've prepared. And we could go on and on and on. I could tell you that next week I'm going to preach in French, and I could promise you and commit to you and sign a piece of paper. Next week I'm preaching in French, and we could have witnesses and a notary public and the whole deal, and you could show up next week. And I'm not going to be able to preach in French no matter how much I commit to you because I haven't prepared. I don't speak French. Now, if you gave me a long time, maybe, but I can't do it next week. Well, see, you're like, well, duh, everybody understands that, but I'm telling you, when it comes to relationships, people think, I can promise my way past my lack of preparation. Let me put it this way. Just because you say I do doesn't make you able. Just because you say I do doesn't make you capable. It only makes you accountable. And when you're accountable for something you're not capable of doing, you become miserable, okay? And there are a lot of people who are locked in marriages where they're miserable because they know what they're accountable for and they just aren't able to pull it off. Every single Saturday, people look at each other and they make a promise and they really mean it. They just don't have the ability to pull it off. In fact, I would go so far to say this, that when it comes to marriage, commitment is really overrated. I'm serious. And here's why I say that. I've sat with couples who said, they look at each other across the table, but when we got married, you promised. When we got married, you took a vow. When we got married, and they're like commitment wars, but you promised. And I'm going, this is irrelevant. The commitment's way overrated when it comes to marriage. Because if you commit to something you can't do, the commitment's worthless. And if you promise something you can't fulfill because you're unable, you're unprepared, the promise is worthless. But I'm telling you, single people, let me tell you what's going to happen to you if you don't listen and if you're not careful. You're going to fall in love, and you're going to think that your ability to commit will override your lack of preparation. Worse than that, you're going to allow some person that you've fallen in love with to convince you that their track record is irrelevant, that the patterns of their life are irrelevant, that the pathways they've chosen are irrelevant, that basically when they marry you, they're going to make a commitment and they're going to automatically change. And you need to understand, a lack of preparation cannot be trumped by a promise. Promises don't matter a bit if a person hasn't prepared. And here's the great news for you. Between now and the time you get married, you get to prepare. You've got time. Now, the problem is, and this is the part I don't know how to communicate very well, you will never be less motivated than now to deal with this. People don't get motivated to deal with these things until they're in a bad marriage, and they're really motivated. They spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and in some cases, it's just too late. So you're not going to be that motivated, but now's the time because now you have the time to prepare. And so if you just get one thing out of this message, here's what I want you to hear me say. I want you to prepare to commit. I want you to prepare to commit. I want you to prepare to commit so that when you make a commitment, when you make a promise, when you take a vow, you will be in a position to where you will be able to fulfill your promise. And here's